But just because they think they're going to do something doesn't mean they are going to do something. I'm of the opinion that the World Economic Forum plan was to roll out a plan that how does a small number of key people keep a large number of people in place to accept crushing food shortages and austerity measures? When it comes out, the people in charge knew what was happening 50, 60 years ago and did nothing.
And then the public becomes aware of that as well.
And right, so this is why the police state was necessary.
You're watching Capital Cause, and my name is Danny, and today's guest is Simon Michaux. Simon, thank you for returning.
Hello, Danny. Been a while. How are you, mate?
It has. Doing well, doing well. It's the day after the election, so we're all kind of, just absorbing what we saw last night. But let's just take it over to you, Simon. What is front and center for you right now?
Right. Okay. So about a week before the recording of this podcast, my work finally made it through peer review, and now is actually up on the web. And so it's actually sort of I now have the label of peer reviewed. So 99% of the venom directed me online was about that I'm a pseudoscientist because I'm not peer reviewed. Not true. It took 2.5 years to get through that, which is exorbitantly long. Now that I've been successful in that, everyone involved's a little sheepish. So it could have come out in Christmas 2021, but then it would have been genuinely shocking. Now I've come across seems to understand this. The commercial world has already done the math and have concluded that what I presented is conceptually true, and they've made economic decisions accordingly. And you're seeing, for example, the electric vehicle industry roll back, and so they're being rolled back on multiple fronts. And so the commercial world understands that renewables and EVs and batteries are just not going to work as well as we hoped. But it's still not acceptable to say out loud in public circles like government or academia. Anyway, so
but is it becoming easier to talk about?
Yeah. It's gone viral. So the entire mining industry in Australia, or not the entire, but a lot of them, have been wanting this peer-reviewed report in hand because promises are being made on their behalf, which is a problem. Because while they're going to make $1 squillion mining more stuff, they're never going to be able to deliver. And what they were worried about was they were being lined up for the not delivering on something so fundamental and then being accused of their fault. Why didn't you tell us, sort of thing. And so they're very, very happy that this is someone's finally said it, and now they can actually start planning for the future. As oil does phase out, peak oil is increasingly looking like November 2018 for crude oil. As now that we're on the downward slope, we do need the after oil plan now. And minerals are the new oil. We just don't know which ones. And there is a tectonic shift happening in the background with regard to how we generate our electrical power.
So for people who are like looking at the gas price, looking at their gas prices, the oil price is it's very tempered right now. So how could that be if we've already hit peak oil?
So we have to actually sort of evolve what we mean by peak oil, because most of what we put in our cars, gasoline, a massive proportion of it, something like half of it, is now coming from the gas industry in the form of natural gas liquids, and also now biofuels. And so that is now being forced to expand while crude oil underneath that is contracting. And thus far, the contraction has been relatively small, while the gains in NGLs have been pretty good. There's lots of gas until about 2030. Right, so peak gas is years away. But so what the problem with that is we are forcing an industry that's spent decades becoming really efficient. We're now forcing a colossal inefficiency into that industry to prop up and put a patch, and it's like a Band-Aid on a bullet wound. right? And it's at best a temporary measure. Uh, ExxonMobil came out with an outlook that basically said we're going to see a 70% contraction in oil production between 2023 and 2030 on a daily basis, as in what's delivered on a daily basis. And that is going to be huge. We're not prepared for that. So the monkey business that's just gone down in the election and the craziness of it all, it was a circus, but it was an excellent distraction. And before that, there are other distractions. Now, if they don't come up with a new distraction soon, everyone's going to see reality. And I'm of the opinion we're on the not just on the edge; it's actually in progress. The
Mhm.
largest economic correction any of us have ever seen, or seen in recorded history. Uh, that seems to be in progress for some time now. It's just it's been masked.
Why do you say that?
Well, we're seeing things like the interbanking. There's a whole series of metrics that you can actually sort of look at. Things like the bond market, what the bond market's doing, what commercial real estate is doing. There's all the fundamentals that sit behind this. The jobs markets that are coming in. When you actually look at the number, then you look behind the number. What does it mean? And you find a lot of the definitions have been changed. Like how much debt was added um, last year just to pay the interest on the existing debt. And something like $1 trillion US is being added every year now just in interest. And next year sometime, the amount of interest being paid on the US debt will exceed what has been collected from tax revenue. At which point they hit to the steep part of the J curve. And that's next year sometime. Unless an act of God happens, or something like Earth gets struck by a meteorite, or there's an earthquake, a tidal wave. Someone stole my car. I don't know, but yeah, the Blues Brothers quote. I don't. The big tectonic shift for me was the BRICS meeting that happened a couple of weeks ago,
Mhm.
because they've been building that for a long time. Uh, to me, what the BRICS nations, what they, the reason they formed in the first place was so countries that had resources and commodities could get out from under the petrodollar empire.
Right.
And so they wanted to form their own system. And this has actually been the game. And there's been an unconventional conflict for the last 25, 30 years. And yeah, and all the wars that we have saw in areas where there was oil in the ground all sort of cleared up a couple of years ago. It's like people have forgotten about it now, but it was like who controlled the oil industry as we approach peak oil. Now peak oil's passed, the effort's moved on to somewhere else. And there's a full-on grudge match over which economic system is allowed to survive. And it's just a theory I've been building for a while, but a lot of my ideas seem to be holding. Um, yeah, and so when the Americans kicked the Russians out of the SWIFT system, and yeah, questioned who blew up the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, asking for a friend. Um, yeah, yeah. These are Europe is now deindustrializing in a way that will have long-term consequences. And in fact, my plan, the purple transition, I'm trying to get that into the hands of the German government because it's actually possible they could re-establish their energy sector, thus their industrial sector, without needing the Russians or gas using that. So see how we go. See how we go. My management at GDK get nervous when I say such things. Uh, um,
Why is that though? Why exactly would they get nervous?
well, two reasons. I've done all this nice work and everything, but it hasn't translated into lots of funding for GTK because the rest of the world, it's in the place the eye cannot see. Right. Unofficially, everyone loves the work. Please give it to us. We need to use it now. Officially, we're not sure we could stand on the stage next to you just yet.
Mm.
Right. So that's problem number one. Also, when you've got a multi-trillion-dollar industry that decides that wants to lobby against you, um, you know, it's interesting. They're doing the same thing that the oil industry is accused of doing often. Theory: people suck, and they do stupid things. So the other problem is when history's changing gears, if you happen to be at the wrong place at the wrong time, you get squished. And if someone stands up, puts their head up above the parapet and proposes a macro scale structural plan during this environment, and then someone takes it seriously, you're either a hero that will go down in history or you become a casualty. um, and I think the people I work with would rather stick to the science of geology. I don't think many of them actually understand the true significance of what's actually happening around us. Everyone still thinks like it's 1950.
Mm.
In 1950, the Geological Survey of Finland ruled the world in the geological context. They were doing amazing work, and no one else in the world could keep up with them. And in their head, they're still back there. So they literally did rule the scientific world in that particular uh, area. So, but what I'm proposing here at the moment is the sort of stuff nation states could go to war over. And they said, well, if you want to do that, you should be in the ambassador corps, or you should be linked to some sort of government military intelligence unit. At which point, you really shouldn't be telling anyone outside the office door. So I think we're in a place where it's like the civilian population has got educated in terms of that is normally associated with some sort of military intelligence classification. And all those professionals are going, yeah, we're not sure we should let you play with matches like that. so, so anyway, but the problem is the conventional work that I would actually sort of, normally do in that environment. A lot of it is like strategically a dead end. Like a lot of the technology development and research development that I'm seeing at the moment, it's at best a stepping stone to something else. Like they're still pushing hard the idea of lithium-ion battery chemistries, even though my work's now been accepted, and the people who've accepted it and understand this, oh yeah, that's 5, 10 years away. For now, we're going to make money on this battery, but my work is suggesting they're not going to make it to sort of 4 or 5 years of a bonanza market. A different technology will override them.
Mm.
People can't handle change; they can't handle novelty. So
Normalcy bias, right?
yes, correct. So we're in the wild, wild west of new ideas. All the stuff that we normally sort of assume that held us together has been atrophying over the last 20 years. And it got really serious in the last 12, 18 months. And we've been covering it. So just as I had this chart where you had like this closing window where the price of oil would bounce up and down between two lines. Gail Tverberg of our finite world came up with this idea, and she was right. She had these two lines, and it's like a cone, and the price would bounce up. It would go up, and it would hit this line, it would go down. And just as that was closing, and we're going, right, we're now going to see, what happens when supply and demand crunch into each other. And then COVID happened, the gift that keeps on giving. And it was the perfect time and the perfect camouflage because everyone went nuts. The entire system got shut down. Everyone lost their collective minds. And in perfect lockstep, every government in the world and every institution started doing stupid stuff. And so we never got to see what would have happened if that was the case. So all the conventional ways of looking at things, that was all sort of overridden by something else. And when you actually look on the graph, the blowout associated with COVID-19 was far more serious than what happened in the global financial crisis of 2008.
The blowout in relation to what exactly?
I've got a graph that's got metal price.
Oh, yes.
So hang on. So let me find that for you.
Hey guys, quick pause. As you know, we are big proponents of physical gold and silver on this channel. However, the conundrum often arises, where do you put it? Do you put it in an above ground safe where it becomes a target for burglars, intruders, etc.? Or do you bury it underground? This is where Dirty Man Safe comes in. This is a very simplified solution if you want to bury your gold or silver, or actually any valuables underground, whether it be alternative car keys, house keys, paperwork, legal documents, anything that's important to you. You can put in this bad boy right here. Let's go ahead and take a look at how it works. All right, so you're gonna start off by digging a hole underground, sticking the tubular module in with the safe inside. You bury your valuables, and then whenever you want to extract it, boom, there it is. There's a string attachment. You just pull it out, bada bing, bada boom. Check it out here. You have 3 different sizes: the girl safe, the man safe, and the old man safe, depending on how much you want to store in this thing. All about distribution. You want to diversify where you put your valuables. You don't want to just put them all in one place. And for more information, also click the link down below and get your 15% off discount. All right, guys, let's get back to the video.
Let me just find it. Here we are. So let me know when you can see it.
Yep, I can see it. Can you maximize it? There it is.
Yeah. Okay. My poor computer is still complaining about what I keep doing to it. My wife tells me it's overworked.
Maybe you should get a new one then.
So I've been lobbying for my work to get me a new computer, and they said, yeah, no, that's showing favoritism.
Yeah, I don't make it too easy.
No, they're pretty good, but they're a government organization, so they've got to be pretty good, pretty even-handed in how they deal with their staff.
Right.
And there are rules, and when they have someone who sort of does something different, they do tend to get a little stressed.
I see.
So anyway, so what you're looking at here is what the World Bank uses to track the health of the industrial system. So back to 1960 in a monthly resolution, we've got the metal price, or the sale price for base metals, precious metals, energy, oil, gas, and coal, and fertilizer minerals. So what I've done here is index the number 100 to the month December 2001. And what that does is it moves the curves to the point where they overlap.
Right.
And you get periods of relative stability. Right. Well, so you had a period of relative stability. That's the 1979 oil embargo that you see that sort of spike there. And that's
right.
Silver that's actually doing the spike there. But anyway, so in January 2005, that happened. And that's related to a pattern in the oil industry. It was actually triggered by the second Iraq war in 2003. And so that little dip in there is the global financial crisis. So the blowout happened in the oil industry and put the system under unprecedented strain. In 2008, everything broke. The weakest link broke. That was the subprime mortgage issue in America. Right. So after that, they fixed it with quantitative easing. And COVID-19 is the peak at the end. And the peak's more extreme. And that dotted line there is coal. The black dot. So coal, and that's like, as gas went offline, with and everything, and gas got geopolitically weaponized. And we also had the Ukraine war in there as well. And so the volatility that created that was not resolved. And so we're still in that mess. And as time has gone on, the peaks have gotten larger.
I see. What does this mean exactly? What does an increased volatility mean?
I think, hang on, all right, let's get to another one. No, here we go. The system's been trying to thermodynamically correct. So this is per capita energy consumption. Art Berman came up with this one of Labyrinth Consulting. So per capita energy consumption versus per capita GDP. Now between 1800 to around the early 70s, we had one relationship, and there was the honest accounting between energy and what we call GDP. Right. We went off the gold standard, and we have a fundamentally different relationship between energy and money. And then from roughly 2005 onwards, we've got a third relationship. So what's happening here is the system has been trying to thermodynamically correct. And when we're seeing volatility, something in a complex system is trying to correct in an industrial thermodynamic fashion, and we're not allowing it to happen by printing of money. We are forcing the situation to stay the same.
So translation, ever since we got off the gold standard, the
Yep.
average person hasn't really increased their energy consumption quite as much as, historically speaking, the rate
Correct.
of change was before.
Correct. And so society hasn't been getting us better as such, but we've been working on the idea of illusion. So the previous chart was this one. So yeah, GDP, world GDP and oil production was indexed to the number 100 in 1965. And in the beginning, they overlaid because oil was energy, energy was work done was economic value. Right. And so in 1971, the US dollar decoupled from the gold standard. And they had to. That wasn't a trivial decision. They had to. They were facing bankruptcy because they'd mismanaged the Bretton Woods Agreement. Uh, they'd incompetently managed their gold reserves of other nations around the world. No one trusts them anymore. Anyway, so the fiat currency started to diverge from the real economy, physical things. And so now we've got a ratio of 17 to 1 between the fiat economy and the real physical economy. So while we've used roughly the same amount of energy, which is per capita, our the world is largely now based in the virtual world, and it's largely illusion. So what this means is when we're seeing volatility, the system saying this can't, we're blowing out. One day something structural will blow out, and we'll be forced into the reset. And I think that reset is now being organized. It's being organized in the West and the East. And the BRICS economies announcement a week ago, or 2 weeks ago, whenever it was, I think is a announcement of the commodities-backed East saying we've got our own economic system now. We don't trust you, mofo's. And the West is planning its CBDIC cryptocurrency great reset, great taking. So either way, we are about to see whatever that is.
Yeah, and this chart, the chart that you just had open, it basically tells us that GDP, which is, you could say, is a proxy for human consumption and productivity, has outstripped how much oil we've produced since
Yes,
1965.
Yeah, because we've been using we've been making stuff up. We've been living in a fantasy land.
Financialized, it's been a financialized world.
So watch this. So people are asked, so what actually happened in 71 then? Okay, same thing, same data as before, but now we're going to have the pinpoint for 100 is January 1970. And so 20 months later, you've got the decoupling. And that happens. Boom. And that's the same data that you saw before, but the scale of the volatility is now cramped down. So we're seeing more and more volatility. So that, if we go back to this, so that's in here. And so from 1971 onwards, we do see volatility, but it happens in a bandwidth. But the scale of the volatility is orders of magnitude more. But and so everything was relatively stable prior to 1970. Now it's not, and it's getting increasingly volatile and increasingly high peaks and everything like that. So yeah, and what this chart shows, hang on, go back to this one. Yeah, this one. The change that happened in 71 was far more serious in a structural context than anything that's happened since then.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Even though the volatility was small, that's when things truly went off the rails. And we've been and in 2008, the system actually died. and we're having to actually essentially um, do cash withdrawals of our national credit card. And so we're not going to, but it's all about stuff. It's all about physical stuff.
Right.
So yeah, like that's your relationship between energy and GDP, right? So you know, without energy, you don't get
It's pretty
anything.
much 1 to 1.
Yeah, you don't there is no. Well, here's the next one. So again, this is one of Art Berman's concepts. So here you've got for 2018 GDP versus total liquids consumption, like the equivalent of what you put in your fuel tank for a car. We're a petroleum-driven society,
Hmm.
and high energy consumption translates to high GDP. Low energy consumption translates to low GDP, no exceptions. So what happens when oil becomes a problem? So and so they're the countries that have gone to this is the countries that have gone to war. So on the left, we've got a column of. Have I shown you this?
I think you showed this on your first interview a couple years
Okay.
back, but
All right.
go ahead and reintroduce it
I
for
was going to say,
people that watch. Yeah.
I don't need to waste your time with
No, no,
stuff already.
go ahead.
Right.
Yeah.
So, all right. I wrote a report about oil, an oil outlook report from a critical raw materials perspective. And it occurred to me that most of the time that we've had a military engagement of some kind or an economic sanction, they've involved countries that have oil in them. And so on the left, we've got all the countries that where the battlefield is or where the economic sanction is. And on the right, we've got the countries who are, how do you say, the aggressors. Who goes to war? Where does the war happen? And on the right, everyone's an ally, right? So everyone's
Right.
an ally. And most of them are peak oil literate, as in there's a government-backed report about peak oil that is then made confidential.
Hmm. Yeah,
That they have.
the pattern is all the countries on the left hand side actually have oil reserves, whereas the countries on the right hand side are. You look at the UK, 0.1%, European Union 0.28%, Canada has 9.1%, but
Yeah. And but the United States is holding everyone together at the moment. You got
mhm,
Saudi Arabia here and Iraq. Uh, so what you've got is the recipients have 44% reserves and 26% production, but the aggressors also have reserves and production. This to me is, and these 10 countries, there's 193 countries in the United Nations.
mhm,
These 10 countries represent about 80% of the oil market. Right. And so this to me is who controls the oil industry as we approach peak oil. Right. So that's what and this is all about energy and resources.
right.
And now that oil is checking out, what do we replace it with? And so and that's what I put together there.
Yeah, it's a classic. It's the same model as the East versus West model that's been laid forth by BRICS.
Well, you might notice countries on the left have all formed the BRICS nations.
Yeah, and they've got the plurality of the oil reserves around the planet,
Mhm.
and it looks like their consumption to production ratio is also a lot lower as well. So
Yeah,
they're producing more than they consume versus the
that's
right hand
correct.
side.
That's correct. So this is the idea of the petrodollar empire. You will produce your oil and you will give it to us. You can sell it, you can be rich, but it will be in terms that we dictate to you.
Hmm.
So the two sides, when you put them together, 77.9% of reserves, 64% of production, and 48% of consumption. Right. So it's so this to me is who controls the oil.
Hmm.
So this is the chart. I've shown you this one before. Hang on. Let's move on. So this is where we've got total liquids, where the blue is oil, crude condensate,
Right.
and the increase is actually natural gas liquids and biofuels.
I
And
see.
so, and this is Gail Tverberg's chart. She does excellent work, by the way. She'd be a good interview.
Who is it?
Gail Tverberg, and her website, ourfiniteworld.com. She's a retired actuary, which means she's got a real talent for numbers. And I got her to review some of my reports a few years ago, and she had an amazing ability to read the report and understand what whole tables of numbers actually meant. Her
Hmm.
intellect is remarkable. Anyway, so this is what she's put together. This is oil production, November 2018, and here we are 6 years later, sorry. Um, we haven't beaten that, and now we're on a plateau. And in the background, about 80% of oil reserves are depleting at a rate between 5 and 15%. So the longer this goes on, the harder that is going to be to beat. So um, there's the oil discovery. Most of it was discovered in the 70s. We're not discovering new oil. Um, and so discoveries is the red and production's the blue. Take one from the other, you get green. And so our net inventory gain happened in 1985. And since then, it's been declining. And half of the oil we've all ever produced has happened since 1996. And so there's the idea that if the price goes up, that makes it worthwhile to go out and discover more resources. Right? That's the neoclassical economic
Right.
agreement. Let's look at that. So there is discoveries along the top, and there is price down the bottom. This is actually in dollars for that year, back to 1861.
So which one is discoveries?
So the
Okay.
blue
Yeah, the
columns are
blue bars.
discovery,
Okay.
and it's a bit confusing. The colors I should reverse, and the red is production.
Gotcha.
So now let's put in price. So this is
Hmm.
not adjusted by inflation, and you see this massive structural change in 1971,
Right.
and that is the thing that has changed, and it doesn't correlate with discoveries at all. Adjust for inflation, and we see a couple of structures now. So there's your decoupling. Um, there's your oil. 1970. For some reason, the 1979 oil crisis was more serious than the one in 73. Now, that peak there correlates with the financial markets becoming deregulated and allowing derivatives to be traded, and credit default swaps, and oil became the most commonly traded trade on the planet. And so some real monkey business was allowed then, and there's derivatives of the atom bomb at the heart of the whole system. So and there's COVID-19, the gift that keeps on giving. And so there is 1985, the peak of net inventory gain, and there is a midpoint production. What I'm just showing here is price has absolutely nothing to do with discovery. So
Right.
the belief that price goes up will magically sort of have more natural resources. These charts suggest that is not true, especially for oil. So
But that's counterintuitive. Why is that?
well, it's getting harder and harder to discover oil. They're having to work harder.
Yeah, but shouldn't the price reflect that then? Shouldn't the price go up? You know, you look at that top chart, the blue bars are coming down, 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 whereas the price chart down below it, sure, it's kind of been moving sideways, but it's very volatile. Nonetheless, it's kind of stuck between this $40 to $140 range.
So it's what's driving the oil price has nothing to do with oil supply, as in they're two
Okay.
fundamentally different things. The oil price, it's something we can't negotiate on, as we must have that oil. Um, but when you see swings in the oil price, they tend to be reflected by geopolitical events. And so it's not a clean supply and demand. You've got several aspects of interference in there, and oil is now the heartbeat of the global industrial world. So it's getting harder and harder to extract oil and much more expensive. Like the costs have just gone through the roof. The stuff that was actually discovered back in the 60s and 70s was really easy to extract, cheap and easy. Now we're now having to go out into the ocean that's 10,000 feet deep, and then drill 10,000 feet into the floor of the ocean. And then when we get the oil up to the surface, we've got to extract all the sulfur out of it, and we
Hmm.
have to do so much more to get a useful product compared to the way things were. Uh, and that's and so now we're actually still seeing that has pushed the price up, but what's controlling the price is something else, and that's geopolitics. Like the big structural change there, there's two big ones. One is the dollar decouples from the gold standard, and the other one is the 2001 financial deregulation market, and they're both finance based, right? So that's controlling the price of oil, not supply and demand. And so we're living in a world that's illusionary, not dictated by reality. So it's a complex system, and which is why when you dig into this, it gets messy very quickly.
How much in the know are people to this that work in policy and places of influence?
But ignorant,
Hmm.
but but ignorant. They are energy blind, they're fossil fuels blind, and they're minerals blind. They do not get it. It's like
Even their
oxygen.
science advisors are they also aloof to all this?
Everyone is collectively like the oxygen you breathe. You need to breathe oxygen to live, but you don't think very often about where that oxygen's coming from or whether it's any good or it's just there.
Right.
Energy's become like that for society at large. Science advisors that are all around our policymakers at the moment, all over the world, um, have gotten very used to the idea that fossil fuels will always be there. And the science advisors are more around things like climate change or solar panels or
Hmm.
wind turbines, renewables.
They're
That, that,
focused on something else.
yeah, they're assuming that everything's in the background
Hmm.
and everything's fine. And like the assumption, for example, that solar power will get cheaper and cheaper and cheaper and then make fossil fuels obsolete. And when that happens, fossil fuels is done. And okay, that's a short-term strategy. But when we get to the point where we can't actually deliver the amount of physical units to the market, then that market becomes inelastic. And the price will go up a bit at first, but then it'll become a necessary, how do you say, a necessary strategic thing, and it won't be a market anymore. It'll be who is friends with who
Hmm.
has relationships with who. It's so science advisors and everything. This is an issue that they don't necessarily think they need to look at. They assume the assumption is someone's already looked at this and they've got the answer and everything's fine. So it's that's this is Art's work again. He's got this is the dark orange is oil, crude and
Yeah.
condensate. The peak in 2018, it never recovers. It never recovers. It goes up a bit, but it doesn't get back to where it was. But natural gas liquids expands.
Yep. And they
So
make up a bigger share
yeah,
of gasoline, like you alluded to earlier in the podcast.
right. So Art has got this analysis, which you work with the best of what you have at the time, and as new data comes in, you make a better analysis. So when new data comes in, he'll make a new analysis. But with what he had at the time, he's got total peak around 2027. Now,
Mm.
there's a school of thought that this is way too conservative, and that's come from these guys. A couple of months ago, August, yeah, it was a couple of months ago, August 2024. It's an overview for ExxonMobil, and they published this graph. So ExxonMobil's a major oil producer.
Hmm.
So right,
Yeah.
2023, there's a serious drop off.
Yeah.
Now, what,
And that light blue area over there just expands and expands and expands into the
so they just said,
future.
oh, that's the wedge of hope. Products
Yeah.
they haven't was it oil plays they have yet to actually sort of discover.
Hmm. It's like when you do an integral in calculus, and then at the end of it you put a plus c.
Hmm.
It's kind of like that.
Yeah,
You're kind of like it's the constant you kind of account for.
the wedge of hope, I call it. So in the same chart, they put this outcome is between 2023 and 2030. There's going to be a 70% decline in the daily production of oil delivery to the market, and that's going to be a problem. So
Mm.
what we're seeing at the moment is a relatively small. We're on a plateau. We haven't quite got there, but things are about to sort of speed up. And if that's the case, well, things are about to get extremely interesting. Uh, what to make of that? Well, I the amount of effort that is required to replace oil is like 20 years of hard work once we actually know what to do. Robert Hirsch came up with that figure in 2005 in the Hirsch report.
Hmm.
So whether it's next year, year after, it's a couple of years in the past, whatever it is, doesn't matter. We're in it. We're actually in it. And we will see on our watch as professionals what we have to do. So, have I shown you this one?
You have, but go ahead and reintroduce it. We have a lot more eyeballs on this channel now since our first
Okay. All right.
interview.
So I into in when did I do this? I think it was 2019 I put this together. I put together I've written a couple of reports and people will ask me, look, could you put a timeline together? They didn't agree with what I had proposed at the time, but they said, okay, could you fit your ideas together? So this is the map. So in 2013, in 1913, sorry, we've had the formation of the US Federal Reserve, the Bretton Woods Agreement, and so on. I've also put in the column to the left the four turnings from the book The Fourth Turning, which is a remarkable book about a history in American culture. It's an 80-year cycle where every 80 years we go to war. And within that 80 years, like 80 years ago was World War II, 80 years before that was the Civil War, 80 years before that was the War of Independence. That cycle goes all the way back to 1492 in some form.
Hmm.
So, and within that, there's a 20-year, there are four generations, and which is why social ideas, say back in the 40s, were very different than they are now, and in the 60s, well, they were different again, and so on. This is actually a pattern that describes that. Anyway, so we've got decoupling of the gold standard, the petrodollar agreement, the plateau of the oil production in 2005, which led to the metal price blowout, and system stress and the global financial crisis. So in 2008 was when the system actually died, and it's been on sort of life support ever since then. And they've been looking at replacing the system. Like there was an attempt to replace the petrodollar, which was the Trans-Pacific Partnership, TTIP, TISA. They're all one agreement. It's an agreement between the corporations of the world and governments of the world to integrate economic trade away from the BRICS economies. And that was to replace the petrodollar agreement. And it failed. WikiLeaks basically leaked it, and European politicians got hold of it and they realized what exactly it was, and so it failed. So that was plan A. Plan B is now the Great Reset, the restructure of society, the Great Taking, the CBDIC, cryptocurrency, and all that. We are looking at, I believe, Thucydides was a historian that lived in the Peloponnesian War in ancient Greece between Sparta and Athens, and he picked up on 18 case studies where you had an incumbent empire and a rising empire power would challenge them. And 12 out of 18 times they would go to war. And that war always came down to the incumbent empire was terrified what the rising empire power would do.
Right.
And the United States and China fit that nicely, or rather the West and the East.
Because
Uh,
if you're the incumbent empire and your power is declining, whereas you have a rising empire, it behooves you to wait much longer because you want to you want to strike while that where there's still enough delta between you two, as
so
opposed to it leveling
yeah,
off.
so there's a more sensible way to do things. Like in the United States, they discovered that they could do fracking, which unlocked an enormous amount of oil. That represents only like 2 or 3% of the global reserves. That's not going to hold anyone together for very long. It was always going to be a flash in the pan. What they should have done is not sold the oil. They should have kept that oil, and they should have used it domestically and ensured the supremacy of the United States for the next century. They could have done that. But instead they put it on the market to prop up the petrodollar empire. And we burned up all the oil, and we didn't really do anything of consequence with it beyond making GDP in a world where it's all illusion. So
Mm.
yeah. Anyway, so between the petrodollar alliance, there's what I call the commodities alliance at the time, but it's essentially the BRICS. Um, and what I think triggered this was in 2018 was peak oil. Now, whether it really was peak oil or not was just a localized peak. You know, people are still reluctant to call that. But everyone, any country that actually has oil, gas, or coal reserves will know the status of their own reserves, and they will actually then brief their allies on that. And once peak oil happens, all fossil fuels will have to be reevaluated. Uh, and it's a different economic world. But to do that is a breach of international contract law. And what I believe has happened is the Russians have actually engaged in the war in Ukraine using the same legal precedent that the Americans did in Kosovo, in Serbia, in 1994, and which wasn't a breach of international contract law, but Europe applied sanctions against them, and that was a breach of international contract law. So Europe has breached international law in a way, and the Russians haven't. So the Russians can then turn around and say, right, okay, you will now use our ruble to pay for the gas. And if you don't, you don't get the gas. And that's unacceptable. And so the war we've got in Ukraine is not because there was no gas or the Russians wouldn't sell it to us, but because we wouldn't use a particular currency to purchase it after we
Right.
broke international contract law. So all those people have been hurt and killed, and the country has been destroyed, and Europe has destroyed itself economically because we refused to use a different currency. And the problem is, if they did use that currency, the ruble is now partially backed by commodities. It's a direct challenge to all fiat currencies. And if that happened, it would put pressure on all fiat currencies, the euro, the dollar, the pound, the yen, what have you. And then it would be game over. And that's unacceptable, which is why they've got a grudge match in Ukraine where winner takes all. And the
Mm.
loser loses everything. Right. So we're in Thucydides' trap. You know, Ukraine war, Nord Stream gas pipeline,
Well,
rejection of Russia from SWIFT.
what would it mean? What would it mean for the West to lose in Ukraine? Because it seems like with the election yesterday, Trump has won. He's a lot more dovish on Ukraine versus
Mhm.
Russia than Biden was. So if he does follow through by ending the war in Ukraine, what would that imply for U.S. hegemony or Western hegemony for that matter?
So to me, you've got different factions that are in the international world, what you might call the deep state, and the two American contenders were different faces of different factions. I think what's happened here is the faction that is actually trying to bring about the commodities alliance has won the chess match, and they actually won some time ago. It's now just a question of how much destruction gets wreaked. The Western plan seemed to be to try and entice us into a wider conflict, and that's been the plan for some time now. Uh, they've been trying to draw the United States and NATO in particular into a wider conflict by doing dumb things, and they're doing the same thing in Israel or Gaza or everything. In like they had a thing where they in Europe they had they've got American F-35s in Finland, and they're doing drills to drop nuclear weapons on Russian territory. While they're doing that, a drone strike that had to have come from Finnish territory happens to attack Russian early warning systems.
Interesting.
You know, about a year ago, there was American technology through NATO fired off a series of weapons from Ukrainian territory into Russia, hitting a number of targets. Two of those targets happened to be nuclear early warning systems, as in a nuclear attack is happening.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, while they were doing that, they had a nuclear capable B-52 in an exercise, making a run on St. Petersburg in the air. As in, they're trying to get the Russians to do something stupid,
Mm-hmm.
make a wider conflict, which to try and derail the rollout of the BRICS architecture.
Right.
And that to me is so Basel III banking accord went live in January 2023, and that recognized commodities like gold as valid bank reserves, that is actually the death knell of all fiat currencies. So the idea of the dollar, the yen,
I
this is
see.
the macro scale plan. Uh, so what do you say when it loses? I was in Hong Kong last year, and I was presenting at a conference for venture capitalists, and there was serious money there. It was run ultimately and controlled by the Chinese government, and I actually met a few government officials. And I heard a few things. I got the distinct impression they were laughing at me, which is okay. People laugh at me all the time. Uh, but they said a few things out loud that I'd only sort of heard before. And everything east is about to divorce everything west.
I see.
And I've seen that in several sectors. Like the World Nuclear Association's in trouble. Uh, in Korea, for example, they've actually got a software that actually is able to do neutronic simulations for the decay of nuclear fuel to develop and run nuclear reactors. Now, normally there was an American software, and then there was a Finnish software called Serpent, and that was considered the state of the art. 10 years ago, the Koreans started developing their own, and 5 years ago, it went live. And since then, they've been running all calculations in parallel. And they're just waiting for everything east to decouple from everything west. Now, the BRICS nations represent the bulk of raw materials extraction, supply, manufacture, right? And they've also got a lot of the wealth, the real wealth. Now, China has a lot of internal problems, and they're in the process of that existing system is in the process of tearing itself apart. I believe that the chess match is all nations understand that the fiat currency era is over, and there is a new system coming in behind that. And all nations are jockeying to see what that is and actually put that in place. And BRICS nations are all rolling their plan out, and the West is rolling their plan out. And so we're
If
about tectonic change.
if China's in trouble internally and they're the ones leading the entire BRICS group, doesn't
Mhm.
that put BRICS in jeopardy as well, or no?
Well, it's dangerous for everyone concerned. My opinion is
And what sort
that
of what sort of turmoil is China undergoing for those who may not know?
so they've got something like 30 or 40 civil unrests a month happening all across China, which are kept quiet. And this has been happening for years. Like there's a lot of civil unrest. And the COVID era in particular was used for the government to really, really crack down on the domestic population. They have had a massive collapse in commercial real estate, and they've got a number of there's a whole series of bank runs happening now. They're in the process of economically melting down, and a lot of their economic indicators are the problem is the information that coming out of China. Can we really believe it?
Mm.
Uh, there seems to be a structural meltdown at an intrinsic level in the Chinese system. That seems to be in progress. Uh, what does that mean? What do we do? Uh, so all nation states are actually in a state of flux because the world was based on fiat currency. They'll hit a point when we do a reset. Now, traditionally, when we do a reset, we just shoot all the politicians, bring in a new currency, promise never to do it again, and then we have a good old-fashioned war to distract everyone and make a bit of money. This time round, that's not going to quite go like that because everyone's watching. Um, I think what is planned is the Chinese have all the industrial assets on the ground and everything is ready. They just need to match up both sides of the balance sheet, supply versus demand. And if the system in between them is actually tearing itself apart, an entirely new parallel system will be introduced. And that introduction will be terribly, terribly disruptive. But if the Chinese government are the ones that are actually initiating it and everyone can actually understand why it's happening, it may not lead to a revolution within China where everything gets destroyed and they start again. And I think that is their plan. They're in the process of bringing out a new plan. So the BRICS nations have, they represent like 36% of world GDP. There's now a reset where they who trades with who and for what and at what price is all about to be redone. And if everything east rejects everything west, then they just won't trade with us anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And as it turns out, um, what is the value proposition the West has to deliver now? So there's a number of long range.
So this sounds highly commodity and commodity based inflationary, right? Like if you're a member of the West, I mean, you're about to see your commodities jump up in price.
Yep. Or just become unavailable. Or the geopolitical swings that we saw in the oil market will now happen in all commodities. All of the above.
Mm.
At a time when our energy system is deteriorating. So you've got two macro scale long range strategic plans being put on the ground, which are like 50, 60 years long. One is Made in China 2049, where the Chinese openly say they want to control everything industrial on planet Earth. And the logic they use for that, the logic they're preparing for war. They've been preparing for a war for some time now.
Mm.
Now, what's been explained to me is the way they justify it, the way they're riling up their domestic population is what the British did to the Chinese in the Opium Wars back in the late 1890s, 1900s, and all that. And they called it the century of shame. And they said, this must never happen again. Now, the Western mindset is, oh, it's about revenge. Actually, it's not. In the Eastern mindset, it's about loss of face. This must never happen again. So they're put in a position where they're not. They'll be in a position so strong that they're never going to be put in that position again, where another nation state could do that to them. It was a form of rape, what the British did to the Chinese, and they've never forgotten. So that's their motivation, and that's how they. And you often hear the Chinese say, "This is our century."
Mm-hmm.
What I also heard in Hong Kong is the West is in the process of destroying itself, and they will not lift a finger when we're in trouble, and they will watch us burn as a consequence of our own stupidity. That's how they see us. And frankly, are they wrong? Right. The other macro scale plan is Agenda 21. This was first released in 1992. It's now called Agenda 30. This is the World Economic Forum plan to roll out. This is the idea where they often talk about where everyone, no one will own anything. You'll have no privacy. So you'll own nothing. You'll have no privacy, but you'll never be happier.
Right,
Yeah.
but they have 5 years to get this done now, according to their plan. I mean, there doesn't appear to be much runway left.
I don't think they're actually. It's a case of what we're looking at the moment is structural change. In the next 5 years, we're going to see step changes and things. Then you've got the idea that will these plans work? You know, just because they've got a plan doesn't
Probably
mean
not.
it's going to happen. Well, what is the implication of a 70% contraction of oil production? And if a major oil company is prepared to come out and say that, they can't be that wrong. Otherwise, you know, their reputation would be toast. Are they trying to get out in front of this? So, but just because they think they're going to do something doesn't mean they are going to do something. I'm of the opinion that the World Economic Forum plan was to roll out a plan that how does a small number of key people keep a large number of people in place to accept crushing food shortages and austerity measures? When it comes out, the people in charge knew what was happening 50, 60 years ago and did nothing.
And then the public becomes aware of that as well.
And it's right. So this is why the police state was necessary. The war on terror. Let me get rid of this. The war on terror that came out in 2001. Has anyone noticed that it started out with religious extremists in other countries, you know, of a Middle Eastern sort of geographical bent? Have all been replaced. We've forgotten about all those, and in fact, Al Qaeda are now our allies. Meanwhile, the police state apparatus is focusing on us domestically. You
Yep.
and I are now
That
the
was
enemy.
built during that time.
Yeah.
That was
And
built as
so,
a response to that.
yeah. but it was always going to be this way. And so that's what I'm saying is this. So the plan that the World Economic Forum was rolling out, people are going to hate it. They're going to be put in an untenable situation. There's going to be such a backlash. I'm of the opinion the World Economic Forum is a expendable. They're put up as like a Welch plug. In a when you're building an engine, you've got all these plugs that actually sort of chemically strip contaminants out of the oil and they wear out. That's a sacrificial lamb. So I call them the Welsh plug.
Mm.
So they're going to roll the plan out. Everyone's going to hate it. They're going to backlash against it. The World Economic Forum will then be taken down, as in, you bastards, how could you do this? This must never happen again. But then humanity is going to be in such a difficult position that the leaders of the world are now going to have to do the best they can with what they have and make the hard decisions now that we've got, untenable macroscale issues. And the plan will, and the new plan will kind of resemble the old World Economic Forum plan because it has to. But because the World Economic Forum has been taken out, the public are going to be convinced it's all okay.
Yeah.
But in the next 5 years, we are going to see some amazing things. Yeah,
No, I mean, we already have the last 5 years, so I
yeah.
mean, that's not hard to believe.
But that graph of the volatility, the swings of volatility are going to get bigger and bigger and bigger until something structural breaks.
Mm-hmm. What'd you look at your ceiling?
Oh, I'm looking at the clock.
Oh, okay.
There's a
All right.
clock up
Well,
there.
gotcha. Well, it's been a pleasure having you on, Simon. Anything else you want to talk about that we didn't get to before we wrap up?
Yeah, yeah. Actually, let's spend a bit of time on. So, hang on, let me just get rid of that. So, pe people around the world have actually sort of, when I present this stuff to them, and they go, well, what do we do about it? And they kept asking me what they should do about it. That was interesting. So I put together the idea of the purple transition. It's been presented about 25 times now. It has not been, no one's been able to knock it off its perch. So it's going to evolve, but it looks like it's increasingly looking like a useful plan. So now I'm starting to hear questions like, if you were to apply this in a society, what would it look like? Okay. So I've assembled a series of ideas, and it's a series of fundamental ideas. Like, what are we trying to do really that sits behind stuff? Like, what was the green transition supposed to do? And what is behind our society conceptually at all levels? And so much of that is now in the process of changing. Our energy, our money, our sourcing of minerals, our manufacturing, but also socially. There are things happening socially at the moment which we would now consider unacceptable. And we've been ignoring them all this time because we think we never say the quiet part out loud. So I put together a network of ideas. One of them, for example, is transport now needs to be reinvented. Trucks need to be replaced in a way where we do what trucks do without trucks themselves as some other system. So society now has to reorganize itself around more communal transport while doing the same things. Then you've got the ideas of degrowth. The system has to shrink and simplify and shrink in size. The just-in-time supply grid across 6 continents has got to collapse down to something more smaller. And the way we do that is, well, we have to simplify what we want and run society on fewer components that we manufacture ourselves. So we've got to rebuild manufacture. So what I'm getting at, a plan formed. And that plan has now merged with a group called the Venus Project. The Venus Project was a futuristic concept city that if you were to build a human society, and let's call it a city, and if you were to optimize that city in how it was designed, and you were to optimize it to the quality of life for the people in the city, what would it look like? And so I've taken their concepts and we're merging with my concepts. And we've now got a new thing called, we're calling Promethean Nexus. And if I can just quickly share,
Sure.
this is actually, okay. So there's a plan there's a plan going up. It's going up on Patreon, and there's now 20 chapters. where chapter one is going to be put out. We're going to launch probably early next year sometime. So we've got a concept society that's going to be an innovation hub. And it's an innovation hub that will look at unorthodox ideas, but then turn some of those ideas into pilot scale demonstrations. We need a mandate to look at, there's a whole lot of things that we know will work, but we've rejected looking at them for ideological reasons. Right. And then for investment to happen, they need to physically see it. It can't just be some random guy on the internet. So we've got to
Right.
have pilot scale demonstrations. So there's a city that's going to be industrial, that's going to do this, and it's going to be as close to industrially self-sufficient as possible. And around that city will be a constellation of pilot scale industrial systems. And this will all be run and powered on by the purple transition. So we're applying the circular economy and the steady state economy, which are now being refitted and evolved into what's now called the resource balanced economy. And right, so that's the concept there. So that red part there is the thorium reactor cluster. So here's a map of what it could look like. And so I've got about, say, 30 pilot scale systems that go all the way from mining all the way out to manufacture, where we're using high-tech ideas, and the whole thing is balanced.
So this
Uh,
would be how a city would look like? Is this how
this
all the
is the
components would be
industrial
placed?
sector. This is the
Hmm.
industrial sector on the edge of the city.
Hmm.
And around the city, I've got stop share again. Uh, all right. So when I say, look, we now need to reinvent transport. So much of what we do at the moment is transport based. So this is the lightning fast.
It's going to be tough to do it in America, though. I mean, everything's so spread out by nature. It's going to be a complete revision of American society.
Funny you should mention that. I'm actually planning to go to South America.
Well, USA, I mean.
South America, like Chile.
Okay.
Um, where are we? Ah, here we are. Okay. So Jacques Fresco was a visionary, and he came up with all these ideas. And in the 70s, he started drawing pictures of monorails. And um, we are in a position where we need to move lots of people and lots of cargo around. We're also in a position where we don't have the materials to make lots and lots of vehicles like we have now. Once petroleum checks out, we've either got a hydrogen fuel cell or an electric vehicle. We've got new things coming online like an ammonia engine or a hydrogen engine, but they're all resources. And what's looking like happening is we have to go to more communal transport. Now we have monorails, so okay. What I also realized too is when you actually look at when freight gets moved around by trucks, they don't all go down all roads equally. There are some trucking routes where like a large proportion of trucking routes happen on a small number of roads, like between supply depots, for example. And so I've got this idea of can we do this differently? And so there's this system that's actually at a mine site where they move ore over an 80-kilometer track. And so you've got like a large amount of mass and it's on a track. Now, when you build a train line, like a train track, it's very expensive because you got to do a lot of earthworks and get it flat. And this thing's actually up on metal stilts, so it's actually a lot cheaper, and you can go over all sorts of terrain, and you can move lots of heavy stuff in a long direction. The engineering's done. My proposal is this. We have a train line where on the top we have monorails, two-way, and under those monorails we have shipping containers. And we have all industry and all the place it needs to go is designed to be on this route. Now, that doesn't replace trucks and buses completely, but we'll have a lot less of them. So there's now less vehicles on the road. And so the idea of, I call this the spine rail system. And so you've got let's say this is the city, artists of it, and we would have like a network. It's like
I see.
like and so and then at the edges where you've got these, it leaves the city. That's when it goes around. That's when it goes around the industrial circuit. And so, getting on this spine rail system, you can go to all major parts of the industrial network. And so,
What do you say to people who might rebut some of this by saying that this seems a little too technocratic for them?
what do you mean technocratic?
Like I don't know. It just I'm not saying that it is, but I can see how some people might perceive it as it's getting a little too centralized planning wise.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Okay. So we're also looking at a change in, we're going to operate on three fronts at the same time. Um, share. So here we go. Right, we're going to operate on three fronts at the same time. So I put together all the challenges that face us at the moment, right? And there's the challenges on all fronts. Two of those fronts is what we call money. Neoclassical economics has a structural flaw in its theory that it can't tell the difference between man-made capital and natural capital. And things like running down resources and also pollution is considered someone else's problem. If you would have a more ecological economics approach, you end up with this idea that we need to actually collaborate. And so this is a concept society. We're going to look at industrial systems being reinvented. So raw materials, energy, manufacture, a new interaction with the planetary environment where I'm working on things like species die-off, land degradation, ocean acidification, but there's also a new society and social contract. And so we have a combination of the sourcing of resources is collaborative, but the application and consumption of those resources is free market based. I'm actually proposing a new economic system that is a hybrid of previous systems. And it's going to be in a small community, 10,000 people. And if it doesn't work, we'll have to look at why that doesn't work. But if it does work, we will be able to ride through some of the volatility that's coming in ways that other communities won't. So I believe, for example, that there is no one solution. I like the idea of lots of different ideas will be applied, where lots of different communities start up and each one's different, and then we trade and learn from each other. And so if we have, for example, the Wild Wild West in a pure free market capitalist system, that can be one community. And some of my other friends are socialism's the way they go, all right, good luck with that. That can be that community over there then. And I'm now going to try something different again that actually matches the problems as I see them. And each one of us seems to see different problems. I see energy and sourcing of resources and manufacture as one of the primary problems we need to go after. The Venus Project traditionally looks at social systems and social justice and all that. I've scared the hell out of them with industry. So it's different. So there will be people who say, "Oh, I'm not sure about that." Yeah, okay, fair enough, fair enough. But
but progress comes from the fringe by definition. Progress
yeah.
does not come from just proceeding down a normal, the normalcy bias.
So we've also got the idea that we seem to be under pressure to come up with a new solution for 8 billion people in one step. So what if we had lots of different ideas and see how we go, and then we exchange how it happens? Because you can argue that laissez-faire capitalism failed in 2008 because choices made. Choices made when it came up and we were confronted with it. Well, what do we do? Oh, moral hazard? Yeah, whatever. Yeah,
Well,
yeah,
there's also limitations to it.
yeah, yeah.
Capitalism optimizes for productivity and consumption and the efficient allocation of resources in a way that a centralized committee can't. But by that same token, it's naive to human nature. It's not naive to human nature, but naive to the human spirit. Sure, you
So,
have all this productivity, you have iPhones, you have social media, but at the same time, you have all of this mental illness, you have all
mhm.
this anxiety. People are unhappy despite having the best. We are better off today than our ancestors ever were, and yet we are more anxious. We're more mentally ill.
Hmm.
There's
And so
something
on.
that's not being met.
And also the communism has failed many times as well.
Mm-hmm.
Like that turned into totalitarian systems that are
Because
unacceptable.
communism, by definition, is also materialistic. And
They also stamped out any innovation. They weren't very good at reacting to things. It was allocation based on what was already known, and we're moving into the wild, wild west of innovation. But a lot of our existing systems are about to crash and unravel, which means things will have to be supported longer than what the conventional free market will allow, as
Mhm.
in you're out of business now. And so we have to learn to work together and actually understand what's happening. So there has to be a level of cooperation, but we need innovation like we've never seen before. And so it's a completely unprecedented system, is what I'm proposing. And so this will be Promethean Nexus.
All right.
It's a
Well, we'll have you on in a couple months to a few months from here, Simon, and we can
Yeah, sure.
see what you got there. Oh, you got something else?
No, this is the tagline I've developed.
I see.
It's yeah. Anyway, yes, I would be very interested this is actually my next generation of professional work. I would like to. This is what I would like to be working on. It's an intelligent response to the threat matrix that's in front of us now. We've spent like an hour or so, an hour and a half, talking about problems. What does one do about those problems? Or do we just sit down and just let it all wash over us and accept our fate? If we were to actually sort of, no, that's unacceptable, I'm going to do something about this, what would that be?
Yeah.
It's
Well, I mean, you're one of the few that's actually working on solutions, not
yeah,
just pointing at the problems. So this is why I have you on, even though we are a finance/investing channel. It's important to hear this perspective. Um,
so I found people get more upset with solutions than they do with problems. That's interesting. They get
yeah,
more aggressive and angry.
it's
Anyway,
the normalcy bias. It's the normalcy bias. It's hard to wrangle people out of it.
it's anyway, I've got
People are
a
afraid of change. So
they're
there you go.
terrified of it. So I want a small group of like-minded people, and we're going to disappear over the horizon, make something new, and I'll come back and do business with whoever's left.
Maybe you can colonize Venus. Mars is
Maybe.
probably off the table with Elon, but you guys are the Venus project after all.
I actually want to actually offer Elon Musk a because I want to be in the desert on the coast of South America in Chile, and it's a very barren landscape. And I was going to suggest to the Mars group that Elon's running that we can have an area that we can test
Mm.
your equipment, and the tagline will be Venus goes to Mars. Uh,
That's brilliant, actually.
Hi, Elon. Elon, how you doing?
Yeah, Elon, if you're watching it, I have Simon's contact info down below in the description box, so be sure to give him a ring.
Yeah, I do talk to quite a few investment groups now, and there's a lot of money looking for a place to land. They just want a credible plan.
Yeah. Well, hey, tell us where we can find you, Simon.
So my website, simonmichaux.com, I try to put most of my information on that. The Venus Project is thevenusproject.com, and the Promethean Nexus website is promethean.thevenusproject.com. So one of those three places I'll start appearing.
Okay.
And what I just showed you, we hope to launch early next year.
All right. We'll have the links to all that stuff down below. So be sure to check it out, guys. Also, let me know what you thought of this interview. If you agreed, right, go, Simon, go. If you disagreed with anything we had to say, let me know what you disagreed with. I do read the comments, so I'm interested in getting your thoughts here, guys. Also, Simon, thank you so much for coming on and spending time with us. Thank you guys for watching. And if you'd like to support us further, hit a like. Hit the like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and if you're getting value out of these videos. And then finally, check out our Substack, capitalcosm.substack.com, if you'd like to support us there as well. With all that said, I'll catch you guys in the next episode. Bye, y'all.
Bye.